I always believed that Amanda and I had a good marriage. Sure, we had our arguments now and then, but nothing serious enough to make me think it could all come crashing down. At least, not until that Thursday afternoon. I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with some takeout from her favorite Italian place. Instead, I was the one who got surprised. The first thing I noticed was her laughter. It wasn't her usual laugh, the one I fell in love with. This one was flirtatious, almost teasing. I followed the sound to our bedroom, my stomach already twisting into knots. There she was, lying on the bed, phone in hand, giggling like a teenager. And on the screen? A man's face, smirking back at her. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. She just glanced at me and said, "You're home early." No apology, no panic, nothing. The guy on the other end of the call just stared at me, and then, as if to rub salt in the wound, he laughed. That sound, that smug, arrogant laugh, made my blood boil. "Who is he?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. Amanda rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. "We'll talk later," she said casually, ending the call and grabbing her car keys. "I need some air." And just like that, she walked out the door, leaving me standing there like an idiot. I wanted to run after her, demand answers, but I couldn't move. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. 12 years of marriage, 2 beautiful kids, a life we'd built together, and it all felt like it was slipping through my fingers. That night, she didn't come home. I texted her, called her, even left her a voicemail, but all I got back was a single message. "Staying at my parents'. Need time to think." Her parents. Of course. They'd never liked me, not from the day we first met. Amanda's father, Charles, was the kind of man who judged people by their bank accounts and job titles. As a construction worker, I was nothing more than blue-collar trash to him, even though I worked my ass off to give Amanda and the kids a comfortable life. Her mother, Vivian, wasn't any better, always smiling to my face but whispering behind my back. The next morning, Amanda finally came back. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched dinner I'd made the night before, when she walked in like nothing had happened. She poured herself a cup of coffee, sat down across from me, and said, "We need to talk." "You think?" I snapped, the anger bubbling up inside me. "Who was that guy? How long has this been going on?" She sighed, like I was inconveniencing her. "His name's Derek. We met at work. And honestly, it's been a while." Her nonchalant tone hit me like a punch to the gut. "A while? What the hell does that mean, Amanda? Months? Years?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a sip of her coffee and said, "This isn't working anymore, and you know it. We've been drifting apart for years." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sure, things hadn't been perfect, but I thought we were solid. I thought we could fix whatever was broken. But Amanda? She'd already given up. Worse, she'd moved on. And then she dropped the real bombshell. "My parents have already spoken to a lawyer," she said, her voice cold and detached. "They think it's best if the kids stay with me. And with them, of course." I felt like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. "Your parents? What the hell do they have to do with this?" "They just want what's best for the kids," she said, as if that explained everything. "And let's be honest, you work long hours, you're always tired when you get home. They think the kids need more stability." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife was cheating on me, and now her parents, people who never respected me, were trying to take my kids away. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. I stood up, slamming my hands on the table. "You think I'm just going to roll over and let this happen? Let your parents take my kids away from me?" Amanda didn't even flinch. She just stared at me, her expression cold and unfeeling. "You can fight it if you want," she said, standing up and walking toward the door. "But they've already spoken to the best family lawyer in the city. You won't win." As the door closed behind her, I sat back down, my mind racing. I wasn't just fighting Amanda anymore, I was fighting her parents, their money, their influence. But one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let them take my kids. Not without a fight. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed felt like a blur. Amanda was barely home, and when she was, she avoided me like the plague. Our conversations, if you could even call them that, were short and full of tension. I tried to focus on my work and the kids, but the weight of everything kept dragging me down. How had my life unraveled so quickly? Then came the moment that shattered what little hope I had left. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I'd taken the kids to the park. Amanda had texted earlier, saying she needed to run errands, which probably meant meeting Derek. The kids were having a great time, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. For a few hours, I felt like everything was normal again. But when we got back to the house, Amanda was waiting for us in the driveway. She wasn't alone. Standing next to her were her parents, Charles and Vivian, both dressed like they were attending some high society event rather than showing up unannounced to my home. Charles, with his perfectly tailored suit and judgmental glare, looked like he was about to give me a lecture on how to breathe properly. Vivian stood beside him, clutching her designer handbag like it held the answers to life itself. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm for the kids' sake. Amanda didn't answer. Instead, Charles stepped forward, his expression as smug as ever. "We need to talk," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. I sent the kids inside, telling them to watch TV while I handled grown-up stuff. As soon as the door closed, I turned back to the three of them. "All right," I said, crossing my arms. "Talk." Charles didn't waste any time. "We've spoken to our lawyer," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Given the current instability of your household, we believe it would be in the children's best interest for Amanda to have primary custody." "Instability?" I repeated, my blood starting to boil. "You mean the instability caused by your daughter cheating on me?" Vivian gasped like I'd just insulted the Queen of England. "Now, there's no need for hostility," she said, her voice as fake as her smile. "We're only thinking about the children. They need a stable, nurturing environment. And you think they'll get that with Amanda and Derek?" I shot back. "A guy she met 5 minutes ago?" Charles held up a hand, as if he were some kind of authority figure. "This isn't about Derek. It's about your ability to provide for the children. You work long hours, don't you? And your financial situation isn't exactly ideal." I could feel my fists clenching at my sides. "I've provided for my family just fine," I said through gritted teeth. "I work hard to give my kids everything they need." Amanda finally spoke up, her voice as cold as ice. "This isn't personal," she said, as if that made any of this better. "It's about what's best for the kids." "Not personal?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You cheat on me, try to take my kids away, and bring your parents into my house to gang up on me, and you think it's not personal?" Charles sighed, like he was dealing with a petulant child. "We're not here to argue. This is happening, whether you like it or not. The lawyer will be in touch." With that, they turned and walked back to their car, leaving me standing there, stunned and seething. Amanda didn't even look back as she followed them, her heels clicking against the pavement like a drumbeat signaling the end of my life as I knew it. I stood there for a long time after they left, my mind racing. I wasn't just angry, I was terrified. They had money, connections, and a head start on whatever legal battle was coming. All I had was the truth. But would that be enough? Later that night, I sat in the darkened living room, the kids asleep upstairs. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a text from Amanda. "I'll pick up the kids tomorrow at noon. Pack their things." Pack their things. Like they were furniture being moved from one house to another. I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This was about my kids' future, their stability, their happiness. And I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. For a brief moment, I thought it might be Amanda changing her mind. Maybe she'd come to her senses and realized what she was doing to our family. But when I checked the screen, it wasn't her, it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated but answered anyway. Hello? This is James from Barnes & Taylor Law Firm, a crisp, professional voice said. We represent Amanda and her parents in the matter of custody for your children. You should have received an email with the initial custody agreement. Please review it and respond within 72 hours. My stomach sank. I scrambled to check my email, and there it was, a cold, emotionless document outlining their demands. Amanda was asking for full custody, with me allowed supervised visits every other weekend. Supervised. As if I were some kind of criminal or a danger to my own kids. There was a section about financial support too, child support payments that would leave me with barely enough to scrape by. And then I saw the kicker: Amanda's parents were listed as secondary guardians, giving them significant control over decisions about the kids' upbringing. They weren't just trying to take my kids, they were trying to erase me from their lives entirely. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't a custody agreement, it was a declaration of war. By the time Amanda showed up at noon to pick up the kids, I was ready for a fight. I had their bags packed, but I wasn't about to hand them over without making my feelings known. When she arrived, I met her at the door. So this is how it's going to be? I asked, holding up the printed custody agreement. You think you can just push me out of their lives? Amanda sighed, clearly not in the mood for a confrontation. It's not about you, it's about the kids. This is what's best for them. Supervised visits? I snapped. Are you kidding me? I'm their father, Amanda. I've been here every day of their lives. You think Derek and your parents can just replace me? Her eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe? But it was gone as quickly as it came. It's already in motion, she said, her voice flat. You're just making this harder on yourself. I felt the anger boiling over. You don't get to decide what's best for them. And neither do your parents. I'm not signing this. She shrugged, her indifference like a slap in the face. Then we'll let the court decide. My lawyer says we have a strong case. I wanted to yell, to scream at her for what she was doing, but I forced myself to stay calm. The kids were watching from the window, their little faces full of confusion. They didn't deserve to see their parents fighting, no matter how much I wanted to tear into her. Instead, I handed over their bags. This isn't over, I said quietly. You're not going to take them from me. Amanda didn't respond. She just loaded the kids into her car and drove off, leaving me standing there with a mix of anger and helplessness. For a moment, I felt completely lost. How could I fight someone who had the money, the connections, and the legal system on their side? That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit back and let Amanda and her parents steamroll me. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But I needed help, someone who knew how to navigate this kind of situation. I reached out to the only person I could think of, Tom, an old friend from high school who now worked as a private investigator. We hadn't spoken in years, but I remembered hearing that he specialized in uncovering hidden truths, infidelities, fraud, you name it. If anyone could help me prove that Amanda and her parents were unfit to have custody of my kids, it was him. Tom answered on the second ring. Hey man, long time no talk. What's up? I didn't waste any time. I need your help. It's about Amanda. There was a pause, then a sigh. Say no more. I'll be over tomorrow. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. If Tom could dig up something, anything, to expose Amanda and her parents, I might have a chance. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for my kids, for the life they deserved. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day, Tom showed up at my door right on time, just like he used to back in high school when we'd sneak out for late-night adventures. But this time, there was no joking around. He stepped inside, took one look at me, and said, All right, tell me everything. I laid it all out for him, the affair, the custody battle, the ridiculous demands in the agreement, and Amanda's parents pulling the strings behind the scenes. Tom listened quietly, nodding now and then, his face growing more serious as I spoke. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Sounds like they've got money, influence, and no problem playing dirty," he said. "But everyone's got skeletons in their closet. We just need to find theirs." "I don't know, man," I said, rubbing my face. "They've always been careful. Charles and Vivian act like they're royalty. If they've got skeletons, they're buried deep." Tom smirked. "Deep's where I work best. But we'll need a game plan." Over the next few days, Tom got to work. He started with Amanda's parents, digging into their financial records, social connections, and anything else he could find. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, trying to stay strong for the kids. Every time they asked why Mommy wasn't home, I gave them some half-hearted excuse that felt like a lie. Then, one evening, Tom called me. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Can you meet me at my office? I've got something big." I didn't waste a second. 20 minutes later, I was sitting across from him in his cluttered office, staring at a file he'd laid out on the desk. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding. He tapped the folder. "Your father-in-law, Charles, isn't as squeaky clean as he pretends to be. Turns out he's been moving money around in some shady ways. Offshore accounts, unreported income, it's all here." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "Are you serious? How did you even find this?" Tom grinned. "Let's just say some of his business partners aren't as loyal as he thinks. A little pressure, and they were more than happy to talk." This was huge. If Charles was involved in financial fraud, it could blow up his credibility, and by extension, Amanda's case against me. But Tom wasn't done. "There's more," he said, flipping to another page in the file. "Vivian's been using her social connections to push the custody battle behind the scenes. She's been pulling strings with judges and attorneys, trying to stack the deck in their favor." My blood boiled as I looked at the evidence. "So they're not just trying to take my kids, they're rigging the system to make sure I can't fight back." "Exactly," Tom said, his expression serious. "But here's the thing, we can use this. If we present this in court, it'll raise enough questions about their motives to put them on the defensive." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. "You think it's enough to stop them?" Tom leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's a start. But we'll need more if we want to win outright." The next step was Amanda. As much as I hated the idea of digging into her private life, I knew we couldn't ignore it. Tom suggested focusing on Derek, her lover. If we could prove he was a bad influence or unfit to be around the kids, it could weaken Amanda's case. Tom started tailing Derek, gathering evidence about his background and daily activities. It didn't take long before he found something. Derek had a history of reckless behavior, including a DUI from 2 years ago and a recent altercation at a bar. He wasn't exactly the role model Amanda was making him out to be. When Tom showed me the photos and reports, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like the tide was starting to turn. Amanda and her parents weren't untouchable after all. But just as I was starting to feel hopeful, Tom hit me with a warning. "They're going to fight back hard. People like Charles and Vivian don't take kindly to being exposed. You need to be ready for anything." I nodded, determination burning in my chest. "I don't care what they throw at me. I'm not letting them take my kids." Tom gave me a firm pat on the back. "That's the spirit. Now let's make sure they regret ever coming after you." As I walked out of his office that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The first court hearing was scheduled for a chilly Monday morning. I walked into the courthouse feeling like I was stepping onto a battlefield. Amanda was already there, dressed in a sharp blazer, sitting confidently next to her lawyer, a man who looked like he was born to intimidate. Her parents were there too, Charles and Vivian, seated a few rows behind her, their faces a mixture of smugness and fake concern. I glanced at my own lawyer, Linda, a tough, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd come highly recommended by Tom. She gave me a reassuring nod as we took our seats. "Just stay calm," she whispered. "They're going to come out swinging, but we're ready." And swing they did. Amanda's lawyer opened with a polished speech about how Amanda was the primary caregiver, how the children needed stability, and how my erratic work hours made me unfit for full custody. Then he pulled out the big guns, emails and texts Amanda had cherry-picked to make me look like an inattentive father. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to shout. Most of those messages were from when I was working overtime to pay for the family vacations and private school Amanda had insisted on. But of course, they didn't include any of that context. When it was my turn, Linda stood up, calm and composed. "Your Honor, my client has been a devoted father from day one," she began. "We'd like to submit evidence that contradicts the narrative being presented here today." She handed over the documents Tom had helped us gather, proof of my steady income, photos and testimonies from teachers and neighbors about my involvement in the kids' lives, and even receipts showing that I'd been the one paying for most of the kids' activities and necessities. Amanda's lawyer tried to object, but the judge waved him off. "Let's hear what Mr. Carter has to say," she said, turning to me. I took a deep breath and stood up. "Your Honor, I'm not a perfect man," I began, my voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But everything I've done, every long shift, every late night, has been for my kids. They're my world, and I'll do whatever it takes to give them the life they deserve." As I sat down, I caught a glimpse of Amanda. For the first time, she looked uncomfortable. But the real turning point came when Linda called Tom to the stand. He presented the evidence of Charles's financial misconduct, complete with detailed reports and witness statements. Charles's lawyer immediately tried to dismiss it as irrelevant, but Linda was ready. "This goes to the character and integrity of the individuals who are influencing this custody battle," she argued. "If they're willing to engage in illegal activities for personal gain, how can we trust their judgment when it comes to the welfare of the children?" The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the documents. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Vivian looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. But it didn't stop there. Linda then brought up Derek's DUI and his bar altercation, painting a picture of someone who was far from the stable influence Amanda had claimed he was. Amanda's lawyer tried to object again, but the damage was done. The judge's expression grew more serious with every word. By the end of the hearing, it was clear the judge wasn't buying Amanda's narrative. "This case requires further investigation," she said, her tone firm. "For now, custody will remain shared, with equal parenting time for both parties." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to make Amanda's confidence crack. As we left the courtroom, I saw her whispering furiously to her lawyer, her parents trailing behind her with sour expressions. For the first time, it felt like the power dynamic was shifting. Outside the courthouse, Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "You did good in there," he said. "But don't let your guard down. They'll come back swinging." "I know," I said, my jaw set. "But so will I." As I drove home that evening, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and determination. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But I'd made it through the first battle, and for the first time, I felt like I might actually win this war. The days following the hearing were eerily quiet, almost too quiet. Amanda was uncharacteristically distant, and even Charles and Vivian seemed to have pulled back. I knew it wasn't over, though. People like them didn't just give up. They were regrouping, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I wasn't going to be caught off guard. Tom and I continued digging. If they wanted a fight, I was going to hit them where it hurt the most, their perfect, polished image. It didn't take long for Tom to uncover a lead that could change everything. One night, as I was tucking the kids into bed, my phone buzzed. It was Tom. "You need to see this," he said, his voice urgent. "Can you meet me at my office?" I kissed the kids goodnight, told the babysitter I'd be back soon, and headed out. When I arrived at Tom's office, he was sitting at his desk, a stack of papers in front of him. "What's going on?" I asked, my heart pounding. Tom slid a file across the desk. It's about Charles, he said. Turns out, his business dealings are dirtier than we thought. I dug deeper into his offshore accounts, and I found something big. He's been laundering money through one of his companies. I stared at the file, the weight of the revelation sinking in. Are you sure about this? Positive, Tom said. I've got records, emails, even a few whistleblowers willing to testify. This isn't just some minor tax evasion. This could ruin him. My mind raced. If we exposed Charles, it wouldn't just damage his reputation, it would undermine their entire case against me. But it also meant escalating the fight to a level I wasn't sure I was ready for. The next morning, I met with Linda to discuss the new evidence. She was cautious but optimistic. This could be a game changer, she said, flipping through the documents. But it's risky. If we present this, they're going to come after you with everything they've got. Let them, I said, my voice firm. I'm not backing down. Linda nodded. All right, but we need to play this carefully. We'll introduce it at the next hearing, but only if they push too hard. We don't want to look like we're retaliating out of spite. I agreed, and we spent the next few days preparing. I kept a close eye on Amanda and her parents, waiting for their next move. It came sooner than I expected. A week before the next hearing, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a letter from Amanda's lawyer, accusing me of emotional instability, and claiming I'd been erratic in front of the kids. They were trying to paint me as unfit, just as I'd feared. I called Linda immediately. They're ramping up, I said, reading the letter aloud to her. This is good, she said, surprising me. It means they're desperate. They know they're losing ground, so they're grasping at straws. Stick to the plan. But the accusations still stung. I prided myself on being a good father, and the idea that Amanda and her parents were trying to weaponize my emotions against me made my blood boil. I was determined to prove them wrong, but more than that, I wanted to show the court who they really were. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom felt heavier this time, the tension palpable. Amanda's lawyer wasted no time launching into his new angle, painting me as an unstable, overworked father who couldn't handle the demands of parenting. When it was Linda's turn, she calmly dismantled their arguments, piece by piece. She presented testimonials from teachers, neighbors, and even the kids' pediatrician, all of whom vouched for my dedication and stability. Then came the moment we'd been waiting for. Linda stood up, holding the file Tom had uncovered. Your Honor, we've recently come into possession of evidence that calls into question the credibility and integrity of the opposing party, she said. We'd like to submit it for the court's consideration. The judge reviewed the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. Charles shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Vivian looked like she was on the verge of fainting. This is serious, the judge said, her voice stern. She turned to Amanda's lawyer. Do you have a response to these allegations? Amanda's lawyer stammered, clearly unprepared. We weren't aware of these claims, Your Honor. We request more time to review the evidence. The judge shook her head. This isn't a matter that can be brushed aside. I'll allow the investigation to proceed, but in the meantime, I'm issuing an injunction against Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds. Until this matter is resolved, they are to have no involvement in decisions regarding the children. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, Amanda and her parents were on the defensive. The tide had turned, and I was ready to push even harder. This wasn't just about custody anymore, it was about justice. And I wasn't going to stop until I'd won. The week after the hearing, I felt like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for Amanda and her parents to retaliate. But instead of another legal ambush or smug lawyer's letter, there was silence. It was almost worse than their usual scheming. They weren't the type to stay quiet unless they were cooking up something big. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from someone I never expected to hear from, Amanda's younger brother, Ryan. Ryan and I had always been on decent terms. Unlike his parents, he didn't treat me like dirt under his shoe. In fact, He'd been the only one in Amanda's family who'd ever defended me, but we'd drifted apart over the years. I hadn't spoken to him since he moved out of state. When I picked up the phone, his voice was tense. "Hey, man. I know it's been a while, but I need to talk to you about something, in person." "Ryan?" I said, caught off guard. "What's going on?" "I can't explain over the phone," he said quickly. "Can you meet me at the Rusty Nail?" "I'm in town, but I don't have much time." The Rusty Nail was a rundown bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where you'd go to drink away your problems without being bothered. It wasn't Ryan's usual style, which only made me more curious. I agreed to meet him that evening. When I arrived, Ryan was already there, nursing a beer at a corner table. He looked nervous, glancing around like he was afraid someone might be watching. I sat down across from him, and before I could even ask what was going on, he leaned forward and said, "I'm not here to take sides, but I can't stay quiet anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the knot forming in my stomach. Ryan took a deep breath. "Look, I know what Amanda and my parents are doing to you. It's messed up. And I don't want to get involved, but I found something." He pulled a flash drive out of his pocket and slid it across the table. "This has everything you need to know about what's really been going on." I stared at the flash drive, then back at Ryan. "What's on it?" "Emails, documents, proof that my dad has been bribing people to tip the custody battle in Amanda's favor. Judges, social workers, you name it. He's pulling every string he can to make sure you lose." I felt my jaw clench as the anger surged inside me. "Why are you telling me this?" Ryan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Because it's wrong. I've always hated how my parents treat people like they're beneath them, but this is too far. You don't deserve this, and neither do the kids." I took the flash drive, my hand trembling slightly. "Why now? Why not tell me sooner? I didn't know the full extent of it until a few days ago," Ryan admitted. "I was visiting their house, and I saw some of the emails on my dad's computer. I made a copy before he could notice. If he finds out I'm giving this to you, he'll lose it." I nodded, grateful but still cautious. "Thanks, Ryan. This could change everything." "Just be careful," he said, his voice low. "They're not going to back down without a fight." That night, I gave the flash drive to Tom, who immediately got to work analyzing the contents. When he called me the next day, his excitement was palpable. "This is it," he said. "We've got them. Not just Charles, but Amanda too. She's been in on this from the start." "What do you mean?" I asked, my chest tightening. "There are emails between Amanda and Charles, discussing how to paint you as an unfit father. They planned the whole narrative months before the divorce even started. And get this, Derek isn't just some random guy she met at work. He's part of the scheme too. Charles paid off his debts to keep him around and play his role." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Amanda had been scheming with her parents all along, turning my life upside down for their own selfish agenda. But now, I finally had the evidence to fight back. The next hearing was still a week away, but I knew I couldn't sit on this information. Linda agreed. "We need to file a motion to submit this evidence immediately," she said. "If we wait too long, they might find a way to cover their tracks." We filed the motion the next morning, and within hours, Amanda and her parents knew the walls were closing in. I got a furious call from her that evening. "What the hell are you doing?" she yelled, her voice shaking with anger. "You're trying to destroy my family." I stayed calm, my voice steady. "You destroyed your family the moment you decided to lie and manipulate. I'm just making sure the truth comes out." "You won't win," she hissed. "My dad has connections you can't even imagine." "Then let him use them," I shot back. "Because I've got something stronger, the truth." She hung up, but her words lingered. I knew this fight was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. Amanda and her parents had built their case on lies, and now it was all starting to crumble. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about justice, for me, for my kids, and for every ounce of dignity they tried to strip away. The day of the final custody hearing arrived like a storm cloud on the horizon. This was it, the moment everything hinged on. Amanda and her parents had pulled every dirty trick in the book to paint me as an unfit father, but now, with the evidence Ryan had handed over, the tables were about to turn. I walked into the courtroom with Linda by my side, a file in her hand so thick it looked like a phone book. Across the aisle, Amanda sat with her lawyer, her parents flanking her like an army ready for battle. Charles glared at me, his jaw tight. Vivian, for once, looked nervous, glancing around the room like she expected someone to jump out and expose them at any moment. "Stay calm," Linda whispered as we sat down. "We've got this." The judge, a sharp-eyed woman who had clearly seen it all, entered the room. As she took her seat, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Amanda's lawyer went first, rehashing the same tired arguments about how I was too busy and too emotionally unstable to provide a stable home for the kids. He even presented a letter from one of Amanda's so-called friends, claiming she'd seen me lose my temper around the children. It was a blatant lie, but I bit my tongue and let Linda handle it. When it was our turn, Linda started slow, methodically dismantling their claims with evidence, school records showing my active involvement, glowing testimonials from the kids' teachers, and even a statement from our longtime babysitter praising my parenting skills. Then Linda turned to the evidence we'd uncovered. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady but firm, "we have reason to believe that this case has been manipulated from the very beginning. The opposing party and her parents have engaged in unethical and illegal behavior to influence the outcome of this custody battle." She handed the judge a file containing the emails, financial records, and testimonies Tom and Ryan had uncovered. The judge's expression darkened as she flipped through the pages. When she looked up, her gaze was icy. "Is this true, Ms. Reynolds?" she asked Amanda directly. Amanda's lawyer immediately jumped up, sputtering objections, but the judge silenced him with a single raised hand. "Sit down, counselor. I want to hear it from Ms. Reynolds." Amanda hesitated, glancing at her parents for support, but Charles just stared straight ahead, his face unreadable. I don't know anything about that," Amanda stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda didn't let her off the hook. "Your Honor, these documents clearly show that the opposing party and her father, Charles Reynolds, engaged in bribery, collusion, and fraud to tip the scales of justice in their favor. They even paid off a key witness in this case, Derek Hall, the alleged romantic partner of Ms. Reynolds." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Amanda's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The judge, however, remained composed, though her eyes blazed with anger. "Do you have proof of these allegations?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Linda said confidently. "We have emails, bank records, and witness statements, all of which have been submitted for your review." The next hour was a blur of testimony and evidence. Linda called Tom to the stand, who walked the court through his investigation step by step. Then came Ryan, who reluctantly testified against his own family. His voice wavered as he spoke, but his words were clear and damning. Charles, for his part, looked like a man on the verge of imploding. His lawyer tried to object, claiming the evidence was inadmissible, but the judge shut him down. "This is a custody hearing, Mr. Cole, not a criminal trial. I'll decide what's relevant." By the time Linda finished presenting our case, the mood in the courtroom had shifted entirely. Amanda sat slumped in her chair, her face pale. Charles looked furious, whispering furiously to his lawyer. Vivian dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though I couldn't tell if she was crying or just putting on a show. Finally, the judge called for closing arguments. Amanda's lawyer did his best to spin the narrative, but it was clear his heart wasn't in it. He knew they were losing. Linda, on the other hand, delivered a closing argument so powerful it gave me chills. "This case isn't just about custody," she said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "It's about integrity, justice, and the best interests of two innocent children. My client has demonstrated time and again that he is a loving, capable father who will stop at nothing to protect his children. The same cannot be said for the opposing party, who has shown a willingness to deceive and manipulate for her own gain. We ask the court to see through these lies and do what is truly best for these children." The judge sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "I'll review the evidence and deliver my decision in 2 days," she said, banging her gavel. "Court is adjourned." As we left the courthouse, I felt a mix of exhaustion and cautious optimism. Amanda and her parents had thrown everything they had at me, but we'd stood our ground. Now, all we could do was wait. Tom caught up to me in the parking lot, clapping me on the shoulder. "You did good in there," he said. "No matter what happens, you fought like hell for your kids." I nodded, my throat tight. "Thanks, Tom. I couldn't have done it without you." He grinned. "Hey, don't get all sappy on me now. Save that for when you win." I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. For the first time, I felt like victory was within reach. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. There were still 2 days left, and anything could happen. Part 9. The truth comes out. 2 days felt like an eternity. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach twisted in knots, half expecting it to be the court with news about the judge's decision. I spent most of my time with the kids, trying to keep things as normal as possible for them. But in the back of my mind, all I could think about was what would happen if the judge ruled against me. Finally, the call came. Linda's voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of excitement. "The judge has made her decision. Custody is yours." For a moment, I couldn't process her words. "What?" I stammered, my heart pounding. "You heard me," Linda said, a smile in her voice. "The judge ruled in your favor. You've got full custody of the kids." Relief washed over me, so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. I sat down, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. "What about Amanda and her parents?" I asked. "They're done," Linda replied. "The judge was clear. Their actions disqualified them from having any influence over the children's lives. Charles's financial dealings are being referred to the authorities for further investigation, and Amanda's credibility is in shambles. This is a clean win, no strings attached." The official hearing to finalize the custody arrangement was scheduled for later that afternoon. I arrived early, dressed in my best suit, determined to face Amanda and her parents one last time with my head held high. When they entered the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Charles looked furious, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. Vivian, always so composed, now looked fragile, her eyes red and swollen. Amanda, though, was the biggest surprise. She looked defeated, her shoulders slumped and her usual air of confidence gone. The judge entered and delivered the ruling swiftly. "Based on the evidence presented, custody of the children will be awarded to Mr. Carter," she said, her tone firm. "The opposing party's actions have demonstrated a lack of judgment and a disregard for the children's best interests. Effective immediately, Mr. Carter will have sole custody, with supervised visitation for Ms. Reynolds." Amanda let out a soft gasp, and for a moment, I thought she might protest. But she didn't say a word. Charles, however, couldn't hold back. "This is outrageous," he shouted, rising to his feet. "You're ruining my family's reputation over baseless accusations." The judge fixed him with a steely glare. "Mr. Reynolds, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt of court." Charles sat, his face a storm of anger and humiliation. Vivian reached over to place a hand on his arm, but he brushed her off. It was clear their perfect facade had finally cracked, and everyone in the room could see it. After the hearing, I stepped outside, the crisp air filling my lungs like a long-awaited breath of freedom. Tom was waiting for me, leaning against his car with a grin. "How's it feel to be the underdog who came out on top?" he asked. I laughed, shaking my head. "Like I can finally breathe again." Tom's grin widened. "Well, don't get too comfortable. You've got 2 kids who are gonna keep you on your toes." "Wouldn't have it any other way," I said. Linda joined us, a satisfied look on her face. "You did it," she said, shaking my hand. "Not many people could have stood up to a family like that and come out on top. I couldn't have done it without you." I replied sincerely. Thank you. As we stood there, Amanda walked out of the courthouse, her parents trailing behind her. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger, regret, and something else I couldn't quite place, maybe shame. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but then she closed it and turned away, getting into Charles's car without a word. It was over. Finally, truly over. That evening, I sat with the kids in the living room, watching a movie and eating pizza like nothing had ever happened. They laughed and joked, oblivious to the chaos that had nearly torn our family apart. And for the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of peace. But as I tucked them into bed that night, a lingering thought crept into my mind. Was it really over? Amanda and her parents had lost, but people like them didn't just disappear. They'd regroup, find some new angle, and come back eventually. I'd won this battle, but the war might not be over. Still, I wasn't going to let that fear ruin the moment. For now, I had my kids, my freedom, and a chance to rebuild the life they deserved. And if Amanda or her parents ever tried to take that away again, I'd be ready. Because if this fight had taught me anything, it was that I wasn't someone they could push around. Not anymore. The days that followed the court's decision were like stepping into a new life. The constant tension, the late-night strategy sessions with Linda and Tom, the sleepless nights worrying about losing my kids, it all melted away. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on just being a dad. The kids were thriving. They laughed more, their little faces lighting up in ways I hadn't seen in months. The house, once heavy with the weight of uncertainty, now felt alive with their energy. We spent weekends at the park, built pillow forts in the living room, and cooked messy dinners that always ended with flour on the ceiling and smiles on their faces. But even as life began to stabilize, a part of me couldn't fully relax. Amanda's silence since the ruling was unnerving. I expected her to fight, to make a scene, to do something. But days turned into weeks, and she stayed away, adhering to the terms of supervised visitation without protest. It felt too good to be true. One afternoon, while the kids were napping, I got a knock on the door. I opened it to find Ryan standing there, looking sheepish. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Finally, Ryan broke the silence. "I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "We're good," I said honestly. "Better than I've been in a long time. The kids are happy, and for once, there's no chaos hanging over us." Ryan nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm glad. You deserve that." There was another pause before he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Look, I know what my family did to you was awful. And I don't expect you to forgive them, or me. But I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For not stepping up sooner." I studied him for a moment, the sincerity in his eyes. "You helped when it mattered most," I said. "If it weren't for you, I don't know if I'd have my kids right now. So, thank you." Ryan let out a breath, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "I just hope they leave you alone now. My dad, he's not the kind of guy who takes losing lightly." "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted. "But if they try anything, I'll be ready." The months rolled by, and true to my word, I stayed ready. I documented everything, kept copies of every email and letter, and even had a plan in place with Linda and Tom in case Amanda or her parents ever made another move. But nothing happened. Amanda continued her supervised visits, and Charles and Vivian seemed to fade into the background. I'd like to say it felt like justice, but the truth was more complicated. There was no satisfaction in seeing Amanda defeated. I'd loved her once, built a life with her, and even though she'd shattered it, there was still a part of me that mourned what we'd lost. But I couldn't dwell on that. My focus was on the kids and giving them the stable, happy life they deserved. One night, as I was tucking the kids into bed, my youngest, Mia, looked up at me and said, "Daddy, are we gonna be okay?" Her question caught me off guard. I sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" She shrugged, her little brow furrowed. Because Mommy said we might have to live with Grandpa and Grandma one day. My chest tightened, anger bubbling beneath the surface. But I kept my voice calm. You don't need to worry about that, Mia. You and your brother are staying right here, with me. This is your home, and no one's going to take that away. She nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep. Okay. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart, I said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. As I turned off the light and closed the door behind me, her words echoed in my mind. Amanda might have lost this battle, but her influence lingered. It would take time, maybe years, to undo the damage she and her parents had done. But I was willing to do the work. On the surface, life was peaceful, even joyful. But beneath it all, there was a lingering sense of unfinished business. Charles and Vivian's legal troubles were ongoing, and Amanda had retreated into the shadows, but I knew better than to think they were gone for good. People like them didn't give up, they regrouped. Still, I wasn't the same man I'd been at the start of this fight. I wasn't naive anymore, and I wasn't afraid to stand my ground. If they ever came after me again, I'd be ready. For now, though, I was content to take things one day at a time, savoring the small victories, a night of laughter with the kids, a quiet moment in the backyard, the sound of their giggles echoing through the house. Because no matter what happened next, I'd already won the most important battle of all.